The beginning of my life can only be described as unfortunate. My parents, marrying at a young age, were deeply in love. Shortly after their wedding, I came into the world, born 9.5 months later. However, about a year and a half later, my mother came to the painful realization that her marriage to my father was a grave mistake. She sought solace in the arms of a lover who conveniently lived just one floor above us in our building. It was a clandestine affair that unfolded daily, with my father diligently going to work to support his wife and child, while my mother sought comfort in the company of her neighbor. This charade continued for nearly 2.5 years until someone revealed to my father the truth about his unfaithful wife. Naturally, my father was overwhelmed with anger. He hurried home one afternoon, straight to the neighbor's door, demanding to confront his deceitful wife. The neighbor reluctantly let him in, and as my father entered the bedroom, he discovered my mother caught in a compromising situation, dressed inappropriately. Filled with disappointment, he unleashed his fury upon her, calling her names and expressing his anguish. Unable to bear it any longer, my father lost control and struck her across the face. In a misguided act of loyalty, the neighbor defended his mistress and retaliated by hitting my father with a stool. The blow was fatal, and my father fell to the ground, motionless. The incident triggered chaos as the ambulance and police were summoned, creating a tumultuous scene. My father was rushed to the hospital, but he never regained consciousness and passed away a few days later. Meanwhile, the neighbor received a harsh prison sentence for his actions. Yet my mother, determined to protect her lover, resorted to desperate measures. She used her resources, including selling our apartment, to secure his release. They concocted a story claiming that my father had inadvertently knocked himself unconscious in a fit of rage, using the stool as a means of self-harm. Thus, this tragic chapter marked the beginning of my life, overshadowed by deceit, infidelity, and a desperate attempt to conceal the truth. My mother and I found ourselves living with her new husband, who happened to be our neighbor on the floor above. However, there was a significant issue. He had a strong aversion towards me, his stepchild. I was just 4 years old at the time, but I could sense the animosity. He persistently interrogated me about my father, a subject no child should endure. Unfortunately, my mother's relatives were unwilling to support me, considering me a burden, so they made the decision to place me in a state-run orphanage. It was a done deal. My mother accompanied me to the orphanage, hastily signing the paperwork relinquishing her parental rights without so much as a glance in my direction. Overwhelmed with desperation, I broke free from the nurse's grasp and chased after her. Crying and clutching onto my coat with my tiny hands, I pleaded, "Mommy, Mommy, don't leave me." I implored, determined not to be separated from my mother and the hopeful future she represented. Yet, she responded by slapping my hands away, shouting, "Get away from me, you tiresome child. I can't stand it." In that moment, I was forcibly torn away from my mother's side, left abandoned as she vanished from my life. I remained at the orphanage, an orphan with a living mother, a bewildering and heartbreaking reality to comprehend. And that could have been manageable, but the trauma silenced my voice. I became mute, causing great concern among the caretakers, who eventually transferred me to a boarding school for children with mental and physical disabilities. I resided there until I reached the age of maturity. Miraculously, when I turned 14, my ability to speak gradually returned. I excelled academically, and after completing the 8th grade, I was transferred to a mainstream boarding school. However, there was someone dear to me who remained at the previous boarding school, a girl who had become a close friend. She struggled with a severe stutter, particularly when she felt anxious or uneasy. One evening, as I made my way to my bedroom, I heard distressed squeaking sounds. I looked up and witnessed a group of older boys pinning down the little girl, taunting and violating her beneath her dress. She wept silently, unable to utter anything but anguished squeaks. The scene was both horrifying and absurd. The boys reveled in their cruel amusement, ridiculing the vulnerable girl. She bore the physical scars of their abuse, a broken jaw, blackened eyes, and numerous bruises. In that moment, something within me ignited. I couldn't stand idly by. I rushed to her aid, chasing away her tormentors and offering solace. From that day forward, she never left my side, and I never turned her away. Despite the hardships, we found solace in each other's presence. When the time came for me to leave the boarding school, she wept inconsolably, and I couldn't shake off a lingering unease. I feared for her safety, dreading the possibility of further harm befalling her. To ensure her protection, I issued a warning to anyone who dared harm her. I would show them no mercy, and I would return to defend her. I graduated with distinction, earning a gold medal that granted me entrance to any university without the need for exams. Despite the numerous opportunities available to me, I made the deliberate choice to apply to the military academy. With my good health, tall stature, and attractive appearance, I was accepted into the military intelligence department. Moving from one barracks to another became my new reality, and I adapted to the disciplined lifestyle. Over the course of 5 years, I diligently studied and successfully graduated as a lieutenant. Throughout my military journey, I never forgot about my girlfriend. Attending her graduation ceremony, dressed in my uniform as a cadet, I caught the attention of the entire female population at the boarding school. My girlfriend, however, hesitated to approach me amidst the admiration I received. She stood on the sidelines, unable to utter a word due to her overwhelming excitement, and tears of joy streamed down her face. Seeing her in that vulnerable state tugged at my heartstrings. I approached her, embraced her, and together we danced the night away. As the evening waned, we walked silently until the break of dawn. The warm June night seemed to intoxicate us, and it was then that everything unfolded. Later, I bid her farewell as she returned to the boarding school, and as we parted, she clung to me, unwilling to let go. And so, we ended our relationship. The following day, duty called, and I left for my assigned station without taking any leave. There was no immediate destination for me after graduating from the academy, so I dove headfirst into the daily routine of military life. Unfortunately, my service was cut short. Our battalion was redeployed to another conflict zone, and in our first encounter, I sustained injuries from shrapnel. Consequently, I found myself hospitalized for 6 months. During my recovery, I was honored with the Order of the Red Star, and eventually, due to health reasons, I received a discharge. By fortunate circumstances, I obtained a modest pension and a room in my hometown, thus transitioning to civilian life. However, I found myself at a crossroads, unsure of where to go or how to proceed. My pension alone did not afford me many opportunities. One day, while seeking solace in a beer hall, I unexpectedly encountered an old friend from our boarding school days. We began conversing, reminiscing about the past, and catching up on our respective journeys. "Yura, we have a vacancy in bank security. Join us," my friend said, setting aside his unfinished mug. "Let's go right now." In general, they approached me because I had obtained a certificate from the military enlistment office and was looking for a job. I was worried about my health condition, but it turned out to be fine. I worked there for almost 6 months, reaching the age of 24. I must admit that I was a handsome guy, both in physique and appearance. Some female customers would even turn their heads as they passed by me. Little did I know that beauty could be a double-edged sword. One day, the head of security summoned me and instructed me to escort the bank manager home. Her regular security guard had fallen ill, and she needed a replacement. I got into her car, sitting next to the chauffeur. She sat in the back, and it seemed like her eyes couldn't leave me. We arrived at her country house. The bank manager, Larisa Sergeyevna, let the driver go and asked me to bring the packages inside. I carried them into the kitchen and prepared to leave. However, the hostess insisted that we have some tea. Reluctantly, I agreed. She then suggested we have a glass of cognac to celebrate our acquaintance. Slowly, we moved to the couch, and one thing led to another. I must say that I proved to be a skilled lover, having gained some experience and practice. Despite her age, she exceeded all expectations. In general, she took a liking to me and kept me by her side as a guard. I ended up living in the mansion for nearly 3 years, working tirelessly without breaks. Eventually, Larissa got married, but she offered me the opportunity to continue working for her in my former role as a security guard, mostly during the night. To be honest, I had grown tired of being an object of pleasure for an older woman, so I politely declined. We parted ways as friends. As we said our goodbyes, she generously deposited a substantial sum of money in my account, which I had managed to save up over those 3 years. After careful consideration, I made the decision to venture into entrepreneurship and open my own business. The type of business I wanted to establish was crystal clear to me. As a mechanical engineer, I had developed a strong affinity for technology while studying at the academy. Without hesitation, I purchased 3 heavy truck tractors and hired a couple of intelligent individuals to join me in the trucking industry. To my delight, things started to fall into place. 2 years later, I transitioned from the truck's cabin to a comfortable office chair. Nostalgia led me to visit Larissa, and upon reminiscing about our wonderful moments together, she graciously offered me a loan to further develop my business. With this newfound support, within another year, I expanded by opening multiple branches in the surrounding areas. I'd also established a car service and acquired several gas stations. My journey from being an ordinary good-looking guy to a prosperous and attractive individual began, and it didn't take long for people to take notice. Prospective partners, or should I say brides, began to emerge in abundance. Wherever I went, I was surrounded by a flurry of interested women. However, I must admit, it started to grow monotonous. I realized it was time to settle down. Coincidentally, around the same time, an acquaintance reached out, requesting me to consider hiring their daughter. Seeing an opportunity, I agreed, and the following day, a charming young blonde named Inna barged into my office. Initially, I assigned Inna to the logistics department, but when my secretary went on maternity leave, I saw potential in her and transferred her to fill the vacancy. Inna possessed a rare talent for being at the right place at the right time, and soon enough, I found myself unable to make a move without her assistance. Gradually, our professional relationship blossomed into something more personal, and after half a year of delightful courtship filled with romantic gestures and affection, I proposed to Inna. My love for her consumed me entirely. Growing up without a family and a mother's love, I was drawn to her with all my heart. The mere thought of having a family filled my heart with a bittersweet longing. Inna willingly left her job to devote herself to our shared life. I gladly fulfilled her every desire, sparing no expense for the woman I adored. Inna transformed our house, employing a cook, a maid, and a chauffeur. She indulged in massages, spa treatments, and shopping. By the end of the day, she was exhausted, leaving her with little energy for household chores. The topic of having children had never materialized into a reality. I once attempted to discuss it with her, but she harshly dismissed the idea, stating that she wasn't ready for motherhood until we were more established. At the time, I couldn't help but wonder, what more did we need to accomplish before considering such a significant step? A year had elapsed, and Inna's radiance had grown even more. She had acquired numerous female companions, spending less and less time at home. Her schedule no longer allowed her to dedicate much time to me. Most of her days were consumed by socializing with her friends, and on occasion, she wouldn't even return home at night. I occasionally checked up on her, only to discover that she had indeed spent the night at a friend's house, like Alona or Angela. I reassured myself and delved deeper into my work. My business was flourishing, necessitating frequent and extended business trips. Yet I had complete faith in my wife and harbored no concerns about her way of life. One day, towards the end of October, I prepared for another business trip. An immensely lucrative contract involving large-scale transit shipments had emerged, demanding my presence to negotiate the terms of collaboration with the client. As we bid farewell, Ina even shed tears, but with the assurance of a swift return and consistent communication, I proceeded towards the airport. After checking in and calling my beloved wife, I stood on the verge of boarding the plane when my business partner unexpectedly phoned me, expressing sincere apologies for postponing our meeting by a week. Some unforeseen circumstance had arisen. Attempting to contact Ina to share the news and bring her joy, I discovered that her phone was switched off. Accepting the situation, I hailed a taxi and, en route, acquired flowers, cognac, and chocolates as tokens of my affection before heading home. The door swung open noiselessly on its well-lubricated hinges, revealing an eerie stillness. I flicked on the lights, only to find the ground floor devoid of any signs of life. Where was Ina? Placing a bag of groceries on the telephone table, I ascended to the second floor, an inexplicable sense of unease gnawing at me, despite my lack of understanding. Here was the bedroom, illuminated by a softer light compared to the first floor. In the midst of it all, I could make out two naked figures tightly embracing on our matrimonial bed. Ina's head was thrown back, a familiar sight, as her fingers clenched into fists, and the back of her head pressed against the pillow. Her eyes closed, she surrendered to the rhythmic waves of passion. Sensed with each thrust, her head moved in harmony with the muscular and hairy body of the young man positioned above her. With a triumphant grin, he gazed into her face. It appeared as though her legs were anchored to the floor, for there were no screams or resistance. My attention fixated on the neatly folded dress resting on the chair, while my ears caught the unmistakable gasp of pleasure in my wife's voice. Deeper, deeper. Oh God, it feels so good. Awakening from my daze, a growl escaped my lips, though my words were unintelligible. At long last, the two on the bed noticed my presence. The hairy lover, propelled by an unseen force, leaped to the far corner of the bed, his manhood rapidly retracting. Desperately attempting to conceal himself with one hand, he extended his other arm as if shielding his gaze from mine. Don't. She's caught. She's caught. Please, please. Had he been clothed, I wouldn't have hesitated to pounce upon him. But I couldn't bring myself to lay hands on him while he remained unclothed. Ina rose silently, a faint smile playing on her lips. She gracefully picked up the dress from the chair and made her way out of the room. As she passed by, she glanced at me, wearing a serene expression. "Leave him be, he's not involved in this," she said calmly. The door to the adjacent room slammed shut, leaving me standing there, my emotions aflame. The lover cautiously approached his discarded clothes, relieved to find them untouched. He hurriedly began dressing, his actions betraying his unease. After some time, Ina returned to the room. She exuded the fragrance of soap and perfume as she entered, lifting the hem of her dress and adjusting her stockings. Taking a seat on the couch, she settled in. I remained standing, keeping my gaze lowered, determined not to meet her eyes. Eventually, she couldn't bear the silence any longer and approached me directly. Raising her head proudly, a smirk formed on her lips as she locked eyes with me. "If you want, you can hit me," she said defiantly. I remained silent. My emotions had numbed, leaving only an unbearable pain searing within my chest. My wife, full of audacity, challenged me, her demeanor reminiscent of a spirited young mare. "I even took him in my mouth," she declared. I clenched my fists so tightly that pain coursed through me, but I forced myself to respond calmly. "And how did that make you feel?" I asked, my voice steady. Her fluttering eyelashes betrayed her vulnerability as she suddenly seemed to falter. Lowering her gaze, she recoiled, sinking onto the couch. Sobs escaped her, racking her body as she trembled with self-awareness. The dressed lover attempted to sneak towards the door, his pitiful whimpering echoing through the room. "I'm sorry, she's the one," he mumbled, his voice breaking, as he stumbled into the doorway. "Ina," I exclaimed, disgust lacing my words as I uttered her once beloved name. "I'm leaving now, and I expect you to be gone when I return in the morning. Make sure of it." Through her tear-streaked face, she tried to say something, but I paid no attention and stormed out of the bedroom. Outside, darkness engulfed everything. The rain poured relentlessly, and the autumn wind tugged at the yellow leaves scattered on the wet pavement. I pulled up my collar and trudged along the drenched houses. Misfortune seemed to follow me with women, first my mother's betrayal and now my wife's. Gradually, the pain began to recede, leaving me pondering my own mistakes. Was it my destiny to be alone, adrift on an icy expanse? One question haunted my thoughts. What had I done wrong? Suddenly, a faint sound reached my ears, startling me. It was a familiar echo from the past. The image of a weeping girl and heartless laughter flashed before me. I halted, surveyed my surroundings, and spotted a small, grimy puppy huddled by the concrete curb, shivering in the cold. Without hesitation, I bent down and scooped it up in my arms. The puppy was so emaciated that I could feel its fragile bones through its skin, and its tiny heart raced with each beat. "Are you alone too, little one?" I murmured, holding the puppy close as it wriggled in my embrace. "Have you also been abandoned? Well, fear not, for now there are two of us, and together we will overcome." Raising my hand, I hailed a passing cab. The next day, when I returned home, Ina was still there. She attempted to explain herself, pleading for forgiveness. She sang the familiar tune of neglected attention, claiming that I no longer saw her as a woman. Absurdly, she even confessed that her infidelity stemmed from a deep love for me. According to her reasoning, the more a woman loved a man, the more likely she was to betray him. I listened silently to this absurdity, yearning for one thing alone, to have her swiftly vanish from my life. Seeking solace, I immersed myself in work, dedicating my evenings to the companionship of my furry friend. However, thoughts of my former girlfriend from boarding school began to plague me more frequently. Where was she? What had become of her? Perhaps she had already found herself a spouse. Unable to endure the uncertainty any longer, I made an impulsive decision and paid a visit to our old boarding school. As I wandered through the bustling corridors adorned with yellow-painted walls, a familiar voice, fraught with a stutter, caught me off guard. "Man, don't step on the wet floor." The words escaped her lips, and I immediately recognized Natasha, my childhood friend. Time had left no mark on her appearance. "Do you work here?" I inquired. Natasha remained silent, her pale countenance and teary eyes betraying her inner turmoil. Damn, I had completely forgotten. Her speech impediment resurfaced when she was distressed. Taking a step closer, I enveloped her in a warm embrace. "I'm so sorry," I uttered, gazing into her tear-streaked face. "Forgive me if you can." I pressed gentle kisses upon her tear-soaked cheeks as Natasha nestled against me, her hand tenderly caressing my shoulder. Together, we stood there, locked in an embrace. "Mom," a young voice called out from behind. "Who was that?" A little boy, around 7 years old, approached Natasha, seeking comfort in her presence. Although I had never laid eyes on him before, a sense of familiarity washed over me, and then it struck me. I glanced at Natasha, and she simply nodded, her silence revealing the truth. 9 months later, another child joined our family, a daughter. Natasha and I were now bound together, united by the precious bond of parenthood.